Good afternoon. We have a great deal of knowledge for this October 2019 afternoon for you on optimizing health through food. 5 most talented panelists, so therefore we have to move quickly so that you can go back to your offices later this week and in the future and understand how you can change everyone's health in the world, starting with food. And so I'm going to start with Claire, who has responsibilities for Feeding America. And Claire, one of the things I thought would be interesting just to start is to talk a little bit about food waste, if we could. Let's see a short video on food waste.
Every day, across the country, tons of spoiled, rotten, or unappealing food is being thrown away. Decades of cheap, plentiful food have left Americans with a carefree attitude, and the consequences are piling up.
Food waste is a staggering problem. We've got about 40% of the food that is provided in the United States is never eaten.
Money that's literally being thrown away.
If you're a family of 4, you're wasting $1,500 of food every year, and it's roughly 10 cents of every American dollar spent on food. So we're talking big dollars.
The Environmental Protection Agency says food produce is the single biggest source filling up American landfills. Last fall, the federal government kicking off a campaign to fight the massive waste with a goal of cutting it in half by 2030.
So Claire, we have an unusual situation. It's hard to ignore the irony that America today, we have an obesity crisis and still a hunger epidemic. Yet it seems we have so much obesity today, describing rather than really focusing on hunger in America. How do you reconcile this, and how could you let us see clearer the challenge of hunger in America?
Wow. Well, if I may first thank you for inviting Feeding America to this conversation. And I think in doing so, it serves as an acknowledgement of the fact that those among us who are the most vulnerable, people who face hunger in this country, over 37 million people based upon USDA statistics, that the health outcomes associated with having inconsistent access to nutritious food are even more stark than in other environments. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to represent the interest of those 37 million people. Feeding America, for those who may not be aware, is the largest anti-hunger organization in the United States. And what we confront on a daily basis would be these paradoxes. One, in fact, is illustrated by the video that you just showed. So, in the same country that has 70 billion pounds of food, not counting the household waste that was being largely discussed there, 70 billion pounds of perfectly edible food go to landfills every year, while nearly 40 million people do not have consistent access to nutritious food. I believe it's important for us to acknowledge the varied implications of that reality, and I hope we have an opportunity a little bit later to talk about some of the things that we're doing at Feeding America in partnership with other organizations, some of whom I'm pleased are on the panel here with us, to solve for those paradoxes. I guess my main message would be hunger is here, no matter which county you live in. The richest of the counties and parishes in the United States have hunger living there as well. And if you just take this as one example, that waste, we need the will, but we have the resources to do something about it.
So when I read what the organization has been able to do, billions of meals provided by people, how do you organize that on such a large scale?
Yes, and thanks for asking that question as well. Feeding America has the privilege of being a part of a network of 200 food banks. Those 200 food banks partner with food pantries and soup kitchens and other agencies around the United States And that number is somewhere around 60,000 agency partners that we partner with. And we have the great privilege of having over 2 million volunteers across the US as well. So it's a vast network of people who come together with common cause, focused on helping the most vulnerable members of our society. We seek to feed people. We seek to ensure that people have a nutritious mix of food available, and we're also seeking to work to be a part of the more sustainable solutions for those communities as well.
In the early 80s, out of our family foundation, we funded a company in Southern California called Life. Love is feeding everyone. And when I look at what you've been able to accomplish at Feeding America, I think maybe we focused on 8,000 to 10,000 people and just the logistics. Have the partnerships with Costco or Kroger or others been helpful in this area?
Absolutely. You named, actually, our first national partnership was with Kroger. And we're grateful for every partnership that we have. So we have partnerships with retailers, and we have partnerships with Purdue, and you'll have an opportunity to hear from Jim in just a few moments. And as one example, we are not at the point, we have the capacity to do even more, but we save 3.5 billion pounds from landfills every year already, and we're not fully optimized in that space. So in those partnerships, we found ways to be a part of multiple solutions at once, and as I said, try to solve for some of these paradoxes.
Okay. Ethrin, you want to jump in here for a moment?
I do. When in Claire and the Feeding America, I was executive vice president for Feeding America once upon a time, but they do great work. But despite the fact that they are capturing so much food, as she just discussed, we're still losing that 40%. And our policies that are in place today don't support innovative solutions for addressing that 40% while also addressing the 37 million people who are in need. What am I talking about? If a farmer, a manufacturer donates to a philanthropic organization like Feeding America, they get a triple tax deduction and Good Samaritan protection. If they donate to Daily Table, which sells food for, they were selling, the last time I was there, they were selling a pound of blueberries for 79 cents. So they're making nutritious foods available in inner cities, but you lose the tax deduction. So you can't have the TJ Maxx of food. You lose the triple tax deduction, they lose the Good Samaritan protection. So the policies that are in place today, Congressman, don't provide the space for the innovation that would capture the opportunity that this wasted food presents.
And if I may just very quickly respond to that statement, I think part of the reason why those policies don't capture all of the aspects is because it's a lot easier to think about hunger as one issue. A simple issue, an issue of getting food from where it is to people who are hungry. In fact, hunger is a symptom of a whole myriad, a complex myriad of issues and challenges confronting the exact same populations inordinately. Consequently, the solutions need to be myriad and nuanced. They have to include policy and work in policy, and Feeding America, in fact, engages quite a bit in terms of advocacy and policy, because we understand that that nuance is necessary to solve for such a complex.
Let's reach out to another partner. Lauren, Uber Health. Pretty much everyone is familiar with Uber today. Your strategy at Uber Health and in partnering with Feeding America, but focused on all the different things Uber has focused on, not just in partnering with Feeding America, but how does Uber see its mission today as it relates to this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me as well. I'll say I've been at Uber for 6.5 years now, and one thing that has always been true is that we look to build products that improve the lives of people in the communities that we serve. So knowing that access to reliable transportation is an important social determinant of health for millions of Americans, we built Uber Health, which is a dashboard and API that enable healthcare organizations to request and schedule rides on behalf of their patients. It's specifically designed for those that are lower income and those that might not have access to a smartphone. And it's something where, yes, we have been successful in reducing transportation as a barrier getting to and from care, but we realize that we're only solving part of the problem. When 1 in 9 Americans are identified as food insecure, we have to think about the intersection of food insecurity and health. Families are unfortunately making this decision between how do I avoid going hungry? Perhaps it means that I am not getting the care that I need. So it's a trade-off, or there are physical limitations that are preventing them from getting to the sources of food. And so if we can take this product that we've built, Uber Health, and partner with organizations like Feeding America, we are launching this partnership where we're giving clinicians the tool when they can ask 1 or 2 questions to identify a patient as food insecure, and then provide that resource, a free ride to and from a food pantry or a grocery store where they can utilize their SNAP benefit. And it's interesting when you think about social determinants of health, and what we've realized is that you can't just think about one avenue. You have to think about the patient holistically. It can't be solved in a vacuum, and it can't be solved on our own. Having partners who are willing to collaborate in this strategy is absolutely essential for us to being able to solve that problem.
So a few weeks ago, I was in China, in Guangzhou, looking at Alibaba supermarkets. And the revenue in the supermarket's kind of broken into 3 parts. 1, you come in a traditional market, buy goods, take them home. 2, you have food made. You can eat similar to, say, a small food court, or it can be takeout and brought home. And 3, you just call up and they tell them what you want, they put it in a package, and it's to you in about 15 to 20 minutes from that standpoint. A dramatic change in what we would think, no people, no one checking you out, all facial recognition software at that time. And so as you think about access to food and Uber and what you can do you see, instead of bringing people to the market, do you see the potential of just bringing food to them?
Absolutely. This is actually a first of its kind partnership for Uber in that it's across our product lines. So it actually involves both Uber Health, Uber Freight, and Uber Eats, where we work to bring food to people instead of people to food. So definitely.
One of the things I think that illustrates, again, in this nuance and complexity, though, is if you take, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Because if you take as one particular area or group that is inordinately impacted by hunger, that would be seniors. And we were having a wonderful conversation before we came to the stage about the fact that delivering food to a senior solves for one issue. It does not solve for the fact that many of our seniors are suffering from all of the ancillary impacts of isolation, social isolation. So sometimes the best answer is to help that person to go outside of their homes when they have limited mobility, they don't have access to transportation, and to help bring them to a place where they won't find themselves so socially isolated. And I know that that's part of the work that the Milken Institute does, is to look holistically at overall health, physical as well as mental and emotional health, I think are all, should be a part of what we're thinking about in this way. So solving for holistically in a nuanced way, rather than trying to find one silver bullet to solve every single issue that impacts these challenges.
I think this is a very important point you've made, Claire. A few years ago, Tom Friedman wrote a book called Thank You for Being Late. I immediately bought the book because I thought it was about me. But the book was about how he got to listen to a lot of conversations and what was going on around him if he was going to go to breakfast, lunch, or dinner with someone. But in it, it was very interesting when he asked the Surgeon General, what is the #1 disease challenge in America? Is it diabetes? Is it cancer? Is it obesity? What is the challenge? Without missing a second, responded loneliness, feeling of isolation. And we can see that today in so many ways. When we realize how sad it is that many of the people who put their lives on the line to protect us, policemen, firemen, people in the military, that the #1 cause of death is suicide.
Yes.
I think it just underlines this, and Claire, I really appreciate you bringing that out. Congressman Ryan, you have been a leader in this idea of regenerative land, and we've seen countries in the world and the efforts that have been made, for example, in Haiti for decades now to try to rehabilitate, get it back on its feet, that have for the most part not proved to be successful. And the fact that they decimated their topsoil, et cetera. Can you talk to us a little bit about this effort of yours?
First, let me say thank you. The general theme happening right now is the concept of integration, holistic approaches, no silver bullet. And as someone who's been in Congress for a long time, I find it very refreshing. So I want to say thank you to everybody here. Because this is what it's going to take in the public, you're all talking about partnerships here. It's going to take the public-private partnerships. And so the issue that I've kind of stumbled upon with regenerative agriculture is very attractive to me because it solves multiple problems. And I think in the time of tight budgets and very complicated issues, what issue or 2 or 3 can we find that we can build a political coalition around that solves what the military would say a force multiplier? It solves multiple problems. And regenerative agriculture does that because it is moving away from industrial farming. The regenerative ag farmer is a farmer that's actually making money, and they're reducing the pesticide use. And so you have environmental benefits to where you're not putting a bunch of pesticides on the food, but you're also sequestering carbon. So you're taking care and participating in reversing climate change, and the carbon in the soil builds the soil, which puts more nutrients in the food. So it's like win-win-win. Now in Ohio, we have issues around algae blooms in the Great Lakes. You see it down Lake Okeechobee, too, in Florida, and a variety of other areas. You see a dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi River that kills about 220,000 metric tons of fish every single year. When we're talking about food insecurity, we're talking about getting good forms of protein to people, and our farming policies are causing all of these other problems. So the regenerative ag approach, I think, needs to be part and parcel of this entire operation that we have here. And in the Department of Agriculture funding bill that we passed, I sit on the Appropriations Committee in the House, that we passed has 12 pilot programs to incentivize farmers putting carbon into the soil, which leads to all of the other things around cover crops and building soil health. So regenerative ag, I think, is a major issue that needs to be a part of this broader conversation.
What could we as a group do to help propel your efforts in this area?
Well, these pilot programs are really important. So getting the Senate to pass the ag bill with the ag appropriations bill with these pilot programs in, but using, I think, the power of the private sector. I mean, that's very frustrating in Washington now. It's like, you either got to be, I'm the all government guy, or I'm the all private sector person. And it's like, who lives in that world? Right? I mean, everything we do, if we do a local economic development project in Youngstown, Ohio, it's like the Chamber of Commerce, the congressman, the Port Authority, who's doing the historic tax credits, who's doing the new market tax credits, who's the local. So we need the public-private partnerships of which you were talking about. How do we get these big funds? I know General Mills is investing now into regenerative agriculture. How do we get these big companies to move? And some are already. How do we have tax incentives that are actually in place. Instead of a broad tax cut, your tax rate goes down as you begin to make investments into things like regenerative ag, building soil health, and everything else. And the farmer right now that's getting squeezed is actually going to make more money. So the farmer makes money, you get investments into rural communities, you reduce algae blooms, reduce pesticide use, get healthier food, put carbon into the soil, help reverse climate change. Heaven forbid we do something like that in Washington, you know? And so I think what you can do, what you are doing, and I think what everybody here is doing, is identifying these issues for the future. What can we do now? Not to transform something overnight, but the Kaizen model. How do we start changing the trajectory over time to where the private investment comes? And so your group can be very instrumental in pushing that agenda.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Hey, Michael,
So, Jim, I'm just going to introduce you and then giving you the floor, okay? A family company. Who didn't wish they could have a family company? Third generation today. And not only a family company. Gosh, you've led this company for almost 30 years today. All chickens are fed all vegetarian diets with no animal products. And it was about 2 years ago that one of the programs we've been pointing out called FAIR, where a group of investors who had $13 trillion just went out and told, in this case, Walmart and McDonald's, that they would no longer invest in their stock and their company unless they changed their supply chain and did not have any factory farming. One of the major supporters of the Institute, Jeremy Collier, was behind that effort at Collier Capital and has recently offered the Institute $1 million of every event of the 200 we put on around the world does not have any factory farming. You are the symbol of what we would think of as a responsible corporation today to society. Let's just look at a little short video of the Purdue McNuggets.
Hey guys, who here loves vegetables? Who likes chicken nuggets? Here we go. How did you guys like the vegetables in the chicken nuggets?
Chicken nuggets are vegetables now?
New Purdue Chicken Plus, with a quarter cup of veggies hidden in every serving.
Hidden.
Well, first of all, I'm glad I've got two sons who are going to be taking over that role. They do a great job. But I think just a response, Tim, what you were saying is another way is voting with your pocketbook, and what the products you buy. And today, millennials are much more skeptical. They're much more questioning of the practices of animal agriculture. And a lot of people may not know that we're in the pasture-raised pork business and the grass-fed beef business right now, because our vision is to be the most trusted name in premium protein, whatever protein that is. And so the Nyman Ranch pork operation out in Iowa is, they're raised in pasture, and then they rotate every year. The cornfield becomes the pasture next year, and the pasture becomes the cornfield. And what they do is rotate continuously. And we're learning from that. We think it's great we acquired that company because we're learning more from them actually than they're learning from us. But if people pick up that product, if they vote how the animals are raised, with what they're purchasing, that's another way they can certainly make a difference.
Yeah.
So Jim, let's talk for a moment about I know you have goals here, reducing greenhouse gas, reducing water usage. Talk to us a little bit about how you've led this company and what freedom you've had to set these goals.
Yeah, we've, on those areas, we have, at some of our operations, we have wastewater lagoons where the water is treated. it releases methane gas. And so what we're doing is covering those now. And it blows up like a balloon, and then we use that to run a GE engine, which basically produces electricity for the operation. And so that's just an example there. And on the water usage, chickens have to be chilled down to a certain temperature by the USDA regulations. And water chilling is the way it's done, and it uses massive amounts of water. Going to air chilling, which we're continuously doing in our operations, uses no water. They're basically chilled in a room, and they travel in that room until the temperature gets down to the required temperature. So there's a lot of areas that we can certainly impact, these environmental, and these are environmental goals that we have every year.
So a lot of us grew up with Frank Perdue.
As I did.
Yeah. We grew up with him on television. You grew up in the household. What has been passed down from generation to generation in the family?
You know, my dad and my grandfather, actually, we'll be 100 years old next year. And so my grandfather started the business in 1920. It was all about quality, and that was the focus and the emphasis for many, many years. But the other thing that was so important was listening to consumers. Listen to what the consumer is wanting and provided for them. And so, for example, these chicken nuggets with the veggies, that became, I have a daughter who's, I have a 6-year-old son who's probably in the 20th percentile in weight. And it's just getting protein in is a challenge, but he eats chicken nuggets all the time. So the idea of he can get one serving, half a serving of vegetables with every serving of chicken nuggets is a way to help do that. But we removed antibiotics from all of our chickens in 2016. It took us 12 years. The reason we did it, though, was the reason we did it, we get about 5,000 contacts a month from consumers, and they were telling us in 2003 that they wanted chickens raised without the use of antibiotics. So that's what always seems to drives our business is what does the consumer want, and we'll provide. Then with millennials, it gets much more complicated. But how the animals are raised is a very big item right now. So we'll have half our chickens having access to pasture at the end of this year. And so that's another, and we're the largest organic producer. So again, just trying to listen to the consumer, and that's something my dad told us, was critically important.
So Jim, as a private company, one could suggest you have more flexibility than a public company. And as you compete with companies now that are being negated, who did factory farming of chickens and other types of things, who might have found a way to produce a product cheaper, shooting it with hormones so it would grow faster and a bunch of other things. How did you position the company in that sense as you saw that competition coming in?
Well, like I say, we didn't do it related to our competitors. We did it related to what the consumers were demanding. And now I will tell you, as a result of that, we're not very popular in our industry. And I send other people to industry events so that they can, and as we continue down this road of, we work with animal rights groups. We have meetings every year with them. We think that we have a lot more in common than not. And so we're a little bit different, and it's a journey. And the challenge is when you have 21,000 people in your company, getting everybody to turn in that direction is a challenge, and that's one of the biggest challenges. But people understand the importance of it. It's going to be, whether we survive or not is, again, doing those kinds of things. So, and we're lucky to have a group of people who really are committed to that.
So, Michael, first, two quick points I'll try to make, and one of them is I was moderating a panel a few years ago, and the subject of millennials kept coming up. And I remember as the moderator asking myself out loud, but I forgot that there was an audience, who raised those people? And then realized all the people on the stage, including me. And I have often heard people talk about millennials in ways that are pejorative. when
Be careful, Lauren. No.
when you'll be happy with where I get. Hold on a second. So when what we've instilled in them, those of us who've raised millennials, is we've created this expectation among them that you do not have to choose between good business and being good. You don't have to choose. And I'm so hopeful that they will hold us to it and that they'll hold themselves to it as well as time passes. And then the other point I was going to make, as I heard the congressman talk and also heard Jim talking, is I was reflecting on the fact I've been in this role now for a year, 2 weeks, and this is my second day in my third week, yay. And along the way, I've had an opportunity to sit at lots of tables and sit on a number of stages. And the first time I heard the concept, since being in this role, of regenerative agriculture, I was actually in a room among business leaders. Business leaders specifically in the agricultural space. So I think that it's catching up, the business imperative and the ability to do good at the same time. I think they're actually catching up. Yeah. And I think you might have been just a little ahead of your time. But I'm hopeful that intersectionality is going to become more and more clear.
Well, your experience at Walmart, the largest company in revenue in the world today, would back you up on that, Claire. But I think what we want to point out is a few things here. Doing good is good business. And in the 21st century, if you can't define what you stand for, like Purdue, you will not necessarily be successful.
Agree.
Next, there is a dramatic change coming. The large percentage of pharmaceuticals that are shot into animals that you then eat. Our efforts at the Milken Institute School of Public Health at GW and the leadership of Lance Price and antibiotic resistance, you now can have antibiotic resistance and you've never had the antibiotic. You just ate it. It was from an animal. And I think, Jim, your efforts there. But things are a-changing. Bobby Dillon is not with us today, but let's take a look at a recent commercial of a company that was known for the most sexist commercials in the world, Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. And yes, they had Kim Kardashian and Kate Hudson and Upton and many others, who happens to be a relative of Congressman Upton. But let's look at where Carl's Jr. is today.
Yeah, I've seen a lot out here in the West. But a juicy charbroiled burger with a patty made from plants? Only the folks at Carl's Jr. can pull off something that bold. All the legendary flavor, none of the meat. When the wagon of change comes, you ride along with it. The new Beyond Famous Star with cheese, only at Carl's Jr., where the food is the star.
So Carl's was bought by a private equity firm that my younger son, Lance, was in charge of. And every time he came to our house for dinner, my wife, Lori, ripped into him for his sexist ads. And he told her that the stereotype customer of Carl's Jr. was a plumber who was hanging out of his back of his jeans and wanted to see an attractive girl when he went and bought the hamburgers. And so you can ask yourself, what has happened? What has caused this ad? Why did a company that was focused so much on selling these hamburgers change so dramatically? And before I'm going to touch on the world today, I want to show you one other ad. And this comes out of St. Louis. And the question is, people just think they know. They can tell a hamburger from a veggie burger, from chicken in a Purdue McNugget, etc. But let's see what happened in this little test in St. Louis to people that claim they ate more Whoppers than anyone.
We conducted an experiment to evaluate how well Whopper fans know their beloved Whopper. The people you will see here are real people, and these are their real reactions.
I've probably eaten about 2 Whoppers a week for the last 20 years.
I love Whoppers. I've turned Burger King into a crime scene a time or two.
I absolutely love beef. Beef all the way.
If it's not beef, I don't want it. First bite, I would know the difference between beef and whatever else you have.
Little do they know, their Whopper patty was actually made from plants.
You're f***ing kidding me.
Real
Wait, plant-based? What are you talking about?
No animals, just plants.
Really? This is a f***ing cow.
No f***ing cow.
Tastes like a Whopper. Tastes like a beef burger.
It's made of f***ing beef right here. You see that? That's beef.
We swear, it's not beef.
That's impossible. It tasted just like a Whopper should taste.
A patty with 0 milligrams of cholesterol, 17 grams of protein, 100% Whopper, and 0% beef. We know it's impossible to believe. The Impossible Whopper, only at Burger King in St. Louis.
I'm confused. I'm reevaluating my life.
So, Athrun, you have had a chance as an academic working for Feeding America or other organizations, now the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, to look at this not just from a U.S. standpoint, from a world standpoint. What should we focus our attention on today?
Wow. Thank you. Well, as we sit here today, there are 830 million people who are hungry. There are 1.9 million people who are overweight, and an additional 680 million suffering from obesity, and some 680 million suffering from obesity, and there are some 3 billion people suffering from micronutrient deficiency. And the World Health Organization says by 2030, half the world will suffer from some form of malnourishment. And when we look at those obesity numbers, and you looked at the commercial and you heard everybody up here talking today, the US is growing as a percentage of population faster than any other country in those who suffer from obesity and the challenge of being overweight. China, in whole numbers, is moving faster towards obesity. They still have 100 million people who suffer from undernourishment, and they are increasing on a year-over-year basis in the number of people suffering from obesity. In the United States, it is directly related to lack of access to food, lack of access to awareness. In China, the challenge of obesity is directly related to wanting an aspirational diet. They want to eat like us as we continue to challenge our food system. In sub-Saharan Africa, we see population growths where there's an expectation that by 2050, we'll increase the number of people in sub-Saharan Africa by 2 billion people. Nigeria will exceed the United States in population by 2030. 1 million young people turn 18 every month in sub-Saharan Africa today. 70% of the population still, their income is still generated from agriculture, and agriculture is at subsistence levels. All of this I put out in front of you because for the very first time I got excited because we're actually seeing investors investing in agriculture in a way at a level that is unprecedented. There were some 1,625 investments in food tech and ag tech businesses in 2018. But what we're also seeing is that those investments aren't going into underserved communities, into companies that serve underserved communities in the United States. They're not going to small farmers in the United States who need the investment in their businesses to support their ability to change agricultural practices. They're not going into small farm irrigation in sub-Saharan Africa. we are seeing an aversion to the investment in the poor, an investment in the underserved. Even though we can demonstrate from evidence that where the return may be slower, there is still a return. But even more importantly for those of us who, like Claire and I, who spend our time working on these issues, we also have an opportunity to make an impact. Yes. And so if we can get, and when we talk to investors, when we talk to entrepreneurs, they get very excited about the possibility of expanding their markets into serving into some of these communities that we're talking about, where they know that their new innovations could support the change that would make a difference in people's lives. But the venture capital that supports their businesses wants return at a certain level and in a certain time. And what we need is new money in the capital stack that will be more patient, that will de-risk the capital stack and support the opportunities for entrepreneurs to begin to bring innovative solutions to some of these problems.
And so how do you use the tax code to help do that? How do you create markets by the way we ask our public schools to purchase food, and who are they purchasing food from? Universities, prisons. We spend billions and billions of dollars from the public side to purchase food for public institutions. So how do you coordinate all of this together? Public-private partnerships, tax code, venture capital, the whole 9 yards, opportunity zones, these vertical gardens, these vertical farms. I mean, I could give you buildings in Youngstown, Ohio. Be perfect. It's right downtown. It's a cool technology, cool industry, cutting edge, in an older industrial town, in the middle of a food desert. I mean, win, 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 win.
Right.
And I think that's the idea here. And that's when you think about an aspirational America, like, that's the kind of country you want to live in. Like, that's some cool shit going on if you're doing that. And I mean, everyone else is swearing on the video, so I figure I'd throw one out there.
Right.
Well, thank you for giving us a chance of sensing communication in the Capitol.
Thank you.
I get so excited, Representative, when you say that, because what you're talking about is creating market-based solutions.
Right.
Solutions where people can make money. I'm not opposed to anybody making money. Where people can make money, but at the same time, we can provide access to affordable, nutritious food for a population that otherwise wouldn't have it. Yeah. Using all the tools, public-private partnerships, creating the enabling environment through legislation, driving investment that is more patient, that provides for the opportunity for entrepreneurs to deliver those kind of solutions. I want to live in your world.
Come on. Incubators that are generating the new technologies so that in these communities, like the forgotten communities, ones left behind, that you're investing in ideas that could come out of there, ideas that can come out of rural areas, redoing the downtowns in some of these communities, like really building the kind of country that I think we want, and honoring and respecting guys like Jim. Mark Benioff's book was out a couple weeks ago, what Salesforce is doing with volunteer hours. I mean, this is the idea that is happening right underneath the toxic political discourse that's happening in the country. Right underneath all that is us, with all these ideas of how to move forward. And unfortunately, it seems like the government's putting a lid on a lot of it.
What I find often happens when you have a conversation about finances is that people think about and try to quantify what the forward investment is, without really thinking about what the cost is for not doing something. Right. So that, as an example, the communities that I serve represent about $53 billion of additional medical costs that could be all but eliminated. We have, in Feeding America, one of our great benefits is that we have a research arm inside of our organization. We have a chance to test and learn inside of our network we've tested and we've learned lots of things about the intersectionality, once again, of food and medicine. We have data that proves out that you can, in fact, one, get ahead of, as Earthworm often talks about, that we usually talk about how are we going to react to people who are already not well. What if we do the things that are necessary to intercede so that they never become ill? So we know about the things that we can do to ensure that people do not become ill. And then on the other side of it, we also have had successful interventions with people who are already suffering from chronic diseases. And so it's not that we lack data. The data exists. It's not that we don't know what works. We know what works. Somehow it feels as if we as a country have felt that we have the luxury of burying our heads in the sand, and then it will go away. It's not going away, and it's growing.
So Laura, let me go to you for a moment. Obviously, there are a lot of young people working for Google. What is their reaction? Excuse me, Uber.
You mean Uber? There are young people at Google too.
And you've let a few go to Google. What is the reaction to what you're doing at the firm? How do employees at Uber feel about what you're doing?
It's interesting you bring that up, and I want to say, thank you to the Milken Institute for including a millennial voice in this conversation. This is the second time I've spoken at this conference, and I think it's important for all the organizations in this room to think about that on a regular basis. Like, what is happening in our future, and how do we include the voice of the people who will be carrying this mission and this work forward? So, absolutely, I love that Purdue is thinking about that. I have people who ask all the time, like, how do I get on the Uber Health team? How do I work on that? Because you're doing something really important. And not to discount the other teams at Uber, I think there's a lot of good stuff going on, but people want to feel connected to what they're doing. They want to do something mission-driven, and it's important every single day to want to get up and to do that. So work with millennials. We're not as bad as we sound. I think it's huge, and I appreciate being included today.
Well, look, what you don't know, you think on the outside we don't look like a millennial, but we are all millennials. So,
Mike, if I may, I've got to jump in here because I came all this way. And I'm working with Stanford and the Chicago Council with support from Rockefeller to stand up a new Food Systems for the Future Institute that will have a component that supports the kind of policy changes we need, building the partnerships that are necessary, while also supporting business operations for a fund that the Institute will own that, if I can build friends out of this audience with you, Mike, will raise $500 million to start a new fund that can do exactly what we've been talking about here. And investing in those businesses that can begin to provide the return to investors, but also make the impact that is necessary on nutrition so that we can address access to food before we talk about food as medicine and prescriptions, but ensuring that everyone universally has access to nutritious food.
So to tell you from the scientific side, for the last 4 days prior to the start of our Future of Health Summit, we had our 27th annual scientific retreat with the world's leading, particularly cancer scientists. And they are moving towards the microbiome, and they are moving to food. They don't know anything about making food, how it was created. Jim, they don't understand your business, but what they do know is what they see in their patients as clinicians or translational researchers, that they're moving. And one of the things that our Prostate Cancer Foundation, a sister group, has put out is the new periodic table. So this periodic table, we're trying to get adopted first in the UK and then here in the United States, but 80 or so fruits, vegetables, and at the end you'll see even dirt as to what it can do for your microbiome and your health. So the potential partnership is there. I'd like to go through the group one more time in closing and say, what requests do you have of the group? What would you like us to do? You have large groups of diverse people here, philanthropists, people running government agencies, investors, people who have devoted their life to health, nutrition, etc. Let's start with you. We'll start from this side. Catherine, what would you like us to do? It sounds like you want us to fund a $500 million venture capital fund. What would you like us to do?
A true impact investing fund, not just one with a label that says impact investing, but one with real metrics for measuring nutrition impact in the populations that the businesses serve, that will provide an opportunity for everyone to have access to that periodic table of nutritious.
So investors like to know, if they're going to invest, who's managing the money? Are you going to be working for that fund?
I'm the person who goes out and talks to people like this. They're real people who have venture capital experience, who actually invest in the fund. Nobody would give me their money, Mike, to invest. I'm realistic about that, but what I've spent my career doing is working to provide support to people who need access to nutritious food, whether in a humanitarian or in a development situation or in an urban environment in the inner city of Chicago. And I never met a person who wanted to stand in a line for food. I never met a farmer who wanted to stop farming when the rains didn't come because he didn't have the tools that were necessary. So I can talk about the market opportunity that is available from these communities that will generate a return, but more importantly, I can talk about the impact in lives that we can make that will help us avoid the challenges of hunger as a force, as a conflict multiplier, but more importantly, that will provide an opportunity for everyone to live life to their full potential.
Jim, what do you want us to do?
Very
besides buy Purdue vegetable nuggets.
You know, Michael, everything you can do to help Claire and Lauren and folks like them be successful, because we're in the perishable food business. You know, we've provided, I think, 76 million pounds of products over the last 20 years to Feeding America. So, but we can't get the last mile, you know, and so these are the folks that make it the last mile. Mm-hmm. And the more we get help there, I mean, and just make it easier to provide that food to the people who really need it, who you're talking about. That would help us out. So.
Jim, I just want to thank 3 generations for your commitment to quality and what you've done. Claire, what should we be doing?
Absolutely. So we talked about paradox early on. I want to talk about another one here.
Sure.
The thing that I wasn't expecting when I moved into this role was the hidden, at least from me, an unacceptable fact that, that while on the one hand, I personally believe we have more than enough resources, including people who care, who are working on challenges around hunger, especially for vulnerable communities. What I didn't expect to learn was how incoordinate we are, and how often I heard the word competition used to describe another nonprofit organization focused on serving the exact same communities that I will dedicate the rest of my life to serving. So my ask is that you expect better of us. In fact, that you demand better of us. That you require that we coordinate resources, that we think holistically, that we use the remarkable wealth and prosperity of this country in service to the most vulnerable members of this country. That's my ask.
Thank you, Tom. Congressman Ryan, I know you've been focused on K-12 schools, regeneration of food. What would you ask of this audience?
Well, I'm not going to let the $500 million thing float around out there without me asking for $500 million. I don't know what the hell I'll spend it on, but if you're giving it out, you know, I'm in.
We'll do what Jim said and give it
yeah,
to me, and
yeah.
I'll find lots of great things
All
to
right.
spend it on.
I would just like to echo what Claire said. Demand of us, not just in the nonprofit sector, but in the public sector, politicians, to see this holistically, to recognize that we spend $3.5 trillion a year on chronic diseases that are largely preventable. And then the next breath, and we do nothing about it, and then in the next breath, we talk about budget deficits and cutting programs and all the rest. All of you in some way, shape, or form are politically active, I'm sure. I'm sure you've all donated to politicians. I'm sure you're active in the schools, districts that you live in. Start where you are, and whether it's a school board or a state rep or a state senator or a member of Congress, ask them to understand this. This is pretty straightforward, and it should be bipartisan. This should not be a political issue. And if the donors and the activists and the local communities are asking and demanding of us that response, we will start shifting things, because it won't just happen here, it'll happen in communities all over the country, which is exactly what I know I'm trying to do, and I think everyone else here is trying to do. So just start where you are.
So Lauren is my fellow millennial on this panel. What would you like us to do?
Well, in addition to continuing to invite millennials to the table, I would say know that there is a desire within the tech world to do good and to actually make a dent in this problem, and it won't happen without collaboration. We don't know what we don't know. We need to be exposed to the pain points so that we can work to create technology and solutions that address them. So please collaborate, invite us to that conversation, and we'll do this together.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today.